Hey everyone, Professor August here, and today we're going to be talking about this book, The Land of Milk and Honey by C Pam Zhang. This is the second time that I read the book. I finished it last night after spending about 4 days reading it. The first time I read it was when it first came out in 2023, and I remember thinking I really enjoyed the book. I was really anxious about it. So I had already planned to go to a book event in San Francisco. Shout out to Green Apple Books for doing great events. But it was at that period where things were just starting to open up and people were going outside without masks, and I think I'd really only gone out a few times at that point, so I was already anxious going to the book event, and I picked up the book, read it really quickly before the book event, and remember it was good. I enjoyed it, and it was really anxiety inducing because a lot of the plot points were so reminiscent of the pandemic, and it kind of makes sense given that it was written during the pandemic, so a lot of what was happening in the world at the time kind of imbued itself into this book. So the second time, this past week when I read it, I slowed down. I wanted to make sure that I was focusing on details and seeing if I actually really enjoyed it or if it was just excitement, anxiety thing that I had the first time when I read it. And okay, so yes, it's great, but I had a ton of anxiety reading it again for different reasons that I'll talk about. So the first time I read it, I was anxious because of isolation and quarantining and all that stuff that we had to go through during the pandemic. And this book deals a lot with those sorts of issues, and kind of the main like the background of the story is this smog cloud has destroyed all the biodiversity on Earth, and everyone is kind of living in this dark, dank world. And that was way too reminiscent of what we were going through a few years ago. And then this time I read it, and I'm really anxious about climate change. And I live in the Bay Area, so we're like the weather, you get all seasons in a day. It's just up and down. Temperatures are nuts. Um, but climate change is a huge issue out here with fires, and I don't know. There was a tsunami warning a couple weeks ago. I mean, just like stuff I never thought I'd have to deal with, and none of us thought we would have to deal with. But climate change is happening, and that's one of the big issues in the book is this climate disaster that takes place, or this environmental disaster that takes place. And so I was anxious for a different reason. So, um, did I enjoy it? Yes. Uh, was it still kind of anxiety inducing and maybe I'll forget about it in the future? Yes. It's an interesting book because I never pick up a book and think, oh, this is something I'm going to read so that I can see if I can teach it. I usually pick up a book and read it just for fun because it sounds interesting. And it occurred to me last night when I finished reading it, this is exactly the type of book I need to have on my syllabus in the future. So in future iterations of my literature course, I'm probably going to have this listed only because if I were to sit down with an author and the author were to ask me, what do you want me to write about? I would say, I'd like you to write a novel about nativism and immigration and minority rights and minorities in general and queer love and the environment and a dash of politics and maybe some sensual passages to keep everybody interested. The author would turn to me and say, great, it'll take me 20 years to write that and it'll be 1,000 pages long. Well, this book was like 200 pages and it includes all of those things. The reason it works is because there is a lot of detail on really important things, and the exposition, the sort of narrative background that would give you the world building, is not really included. You get the world through the eyes of the narrator, and you're really only given details that are very specific to what is happening in this person's recollection of 1 year of her life. So it's great because it has all of those themes, and I can actually use this book in future to touch on issues of class and rich versus poor, the ethics of science and the morality of science, and so on and so on and so on. So I really enjoyed it. This book is about a woman's life in 1 year. It's a recollection narrative. So, in the first few pages, we understand that this is an older woman telling us about one specific year when she was 29 years old and what she went through. A lot happens in that 1 year period. The book opens up with her in the UK. She's an American. She's Chinese and Korean American. Living in the UK, the borders of the United States close because there's this global environmental disaster that has ravaged the biodiversity of the globe, and most countries have turned nativist, meaning that America is for Americans, and Germany is for Germans, and Italy is for Italians, and everybody who isn't an American can't come. Anybody who isn't an Italian can't come to Italy. Anybody who's German can't go to Germany. And so she's kind of stuck as an American in the UK, and she can't go back to the United States because there's a point system for who can come back, and she's not well off. She, according to American laws, is not native enough, meaning that her heritage doesn't go back long enough, so that counts against her. She has a lot of debt from her mother's death, and that counts against her. So she's kind of stuck in Europe. One day she sees this ad for a job as a chef in Italy, somewhere in Italy, and she applies to it, making up stuff about her background, and she went to Le Cordon Bleu, and she's a fabulous French chef, and all this stuff. None of it is real. She's kind of like a line cook, essentially, and she gets the job interview and then gets the job, and she moves to this mountaintop in Italy, which has been ceded to a really rich person, and this rich person has turned the mountaintop into a country in and of itself called Miele, so like literally the land of milk and honey, or just the land of honey. So it smells like honey because the grass that's been planted there has a very particular smell to it, and it's one of the only places on Earth that still has sunlight because it's so high up on the mountaintop. And so she goes from this gray, dank area in Europe into this new country that has been formed by a really rich person. The whole existence of the country hinges upon the financing by other really rich people. And so all of these other really rich people give money in order to reside as a resident in this new country. And in exchange, the owner, the sort of the narrator calls him, the employer. He takes the money and puts it into the science of food making, because the biodiversity of the world has died. Everybody is eating mung bean just to survive, and as a really rich person, he's trying to keep uh, new forms of grain and new animals alive so that they could use it for food sources. In addition to keeping things alive, they on the mountaintop are also bringing back extinct animals, things that have been extinct for a very long time, like the woolly mammoth, just so that they can use it as this elevated, exquisite, exotic food source. So our narrator gets the job on the mountainside, on the mountaintop, and immediately has imposter syndrome because she's lied to get the job. Her employer already knows about the lie because he's so rich, he's able to do a background check, but he doesn't fire her or anything like that. So she lives for a year on the mountaintop. And that's what the story revolves around: what happens with her cooking, her ability to cook certain types of foods to the taste of the very rich and the elite. And she also comes in contact with the employer's daughter, who she then falls in love with. And so we get a nice, long and kind of tragic love story between these two women. There are three main characters, well, really just two main characters, and then the employer who is present and kind of a foil to the daughter. Um, and then there are some other smaller characters who I'm not going to speak on, but they're all rich and kind of what you expect from the really elite rich people. I don't know, go to Google, type in the richest people, see what they're doing. That's who these people are. And so the main character is the narrator. She's unnamed. We don't know. We know she's 29 years old. We know she's a chef, and we learn a lot about her background. She had a mom who she didn't quite get along with. She has a cat she doesn't particularly like. But at the beginning of the novel, her mom passes away, so she's left with all of the debt that her mom has, and she has to somehow figure out how to pay all that debt so she can go back to the United States when the borders open, or through the point system that the United States had set up in this world for somebody like her to actually go back to California, where she was from. She is a good character. I actually really like her as a character because she embodies everything that is kind of normal. So she aspires to higher social status for herself, like many of us do. She also has a lot of imposter syndrome, like a lot of us do. She is aware of class difference and morality, so she seems to be a really moral person based off of the latter half of the novel. And so she's really, I kind of like her as a character. The second major character is Aida. Aida is 20 years old. She's the daughter of the employer, and I'm not sure how this happens, but she's incredibly intelligent, so much so that she's so much more highly educated than the narrator is, even though the narrator is 29 and Aida is only 20. So Aida has gone to school for like some biochemistry, something, something, where she's super knowledgeable about science and the development of different animals. And so she more or less runs the scientific aspect of the mountainside, while her father deals with the economic side of it, trying to entice more rich people to come and invest in this mountain country. So the two of them meet. And they have a really rocky relationship. The narrator doesn't know if Aida likes her. Aida is really judgmental, really, really sure of herself. She's kind of aggravating at certain points because of how sure she is about everything. And because she is so young, it makes it even more kind of like, uh, I don't know. I've encountered people like this where you're like, okay, live a little before you're so judgmental about other people's beliefs and the things that they do. Also, you're only 20 years old. So, the issues of morality are not going to be handed to you. And yet, in this novel, she's the one who is kind of playing God. She's the one who's able to deal with the science and has this grand vision of how she's going to save humanity and the food sources of the world. Except when it comes down to it, it really is just going to serve the really rich and powerful. So the narrator sees this, and over time, spending time cooking with Aida and eating with Aida, she kind of falls in love with her. And so the two of them um, more or less live together in a room on the mountaintop, and over time you get to hear the or see the tribulations and the joys of these two people and the relationship. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a really beautiful love story, but it is also super tragic. And the last couple of lines of the book just made me go, oh, this is it really gets you. So it's a really nice story between the two, and it creates a nice dichotomy between somebody who's super rich and powerful and has all the self-confidence in the world, and somebody who is not and is trying to make it in a world where the super rich and super powerful are constantly judging her based off of appearance and existence, and the things that she can and can't do, um, and what the power dynamics between the rich and the poor are. This book is actually really easy to read because it's not convoluted in any way. It's very quick, and you get a lot of information in a short space. It's not conducive to reading a couple pages and putting it down. So it's one of those books where it lends itself to just reading straight through. I found myself having to force myself to put the book down because the first time I read it quickly because it is conducive to quick reading, just page after page after page to see what's happening next. The story is really fascinating, so you get to see this created world of the very rich and powerful, set against the backdrop of Italy, where it's just literally is gray because of the smog and the poverty that ensues and the damage that occurs because of such an environmental disaster. So it's an interesting read, wanting to go quickly. I had to slow myself down just in order to take in all of the details. So the book is really detailed, and it is very like florid. It's poetic in a lot of places, especially when the author writes about food. Food is this major part of the book. In fact, you could argue that it is kind of a character in and of itself because of the way that it appears in the book. Um, the the characters in the book deal with food. They make food, they grow food, they cook food, they enjoy food, and so there's a lot of pleasure associated with taste, and how that pleasure can arise, can be developed, and can also be lost. So there's a lot of detail there about certain types of foods. I'll be honest with you, 90% of the food mentioned in this book I've never heard of. I am not like a francophone Frenchophile. Is that what is it called? Francophone? That's when you speak French. Francophile, yeah. So somebody who's like in love with French stuff. I'm not a person who enjoys like super rich types of foods. Like I really enjoy a really good sandwich. Um, a nice slice of pizza that's perfectly made is fabulous, even though it costs $2. Right? Like I'm not one of those people who enjoys an $80 meal or $100 meal or $500 meal. It actually is kind of anxiety inducing when a menu has food that is super expensive, not because it's unaffordable. It's just I don't know that I can appreciate it the way that I'm supposed to appreciate it. There was a time when I lived in Chicago when friends and I went to a restaurant called Alinea in Chicago. Great restaurant. If you're in Chicago, save up a couple of paychecks and then you can go. Um, we went for I think it was graduation. I don't remember what it was. It was this big event, and so four of us went to the restaurant. It was $500 per person, maybe a little more than that. You have to buy tickets to go to this restaurant. You show up as soon as you sit down. Like I don't know, it was this insane thing where they bring out a piece of wood, and on the side of the wood there are plants, and then some foam, and they set it down in front of you, and like that's the thing you're going to eat. And then they take the piece of wood away after you've eaten the plant and the foam, and then they bring out a little spoon, and the spoon is made of a clamshell, and inside the clamshell there's a little I don't know, bread foam and caviar and butter or something, and you eat that, and then they take it away, and just over it for like 4 hours. That's what it was. It was just all these weird foods, and you're paying for the experience, right, of how the super rich live. It was fun, and it also made me feel really guilty because by the end of it, I don't actually know if I enjoyed it or not. Like the food was okay, right? The food was great, the service was great, but it's not the type of thing I enjoy doing. Um, and so I was reminded a lot of that when I was reading it. Anyways, so the novel itself has these elements of food that are very, very fantastical, and a lot of us are not going to experience those. And if we do, it's just going to be like a one-time or two-time thing in our lives. This is just day after day after day because all of the residents are super rich and they're expecting this sort of treatment. There are also a lot of really like sensual scenes with food and sex. So the narrator and Aida, they fall in love, and so there are these really like sensual scenes between the two of them where a woman's pleasure or female pleasure is described in extensive detail, and it's almost indistinguishable between the way food is described and the way sex is described. So uh, in those scenes you have to sort of like slow down and read the detail and read, just sort of like try to feel what is being told on the page. And to be honest, you can kind of feel what the page is describing because it is so detailed and so visceral. So it is really well written in that way. So yes, it is a good easy read, but I would suggest to sort of like slow down to make sure that everything is understood, and before you turn the page and move on, there are very small details that set up what's going to happen later in the book, and there are kind of markers that are hidden that you would easily miss if you just speed through it like I did the first time. So I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to add this to my syllabus going forward because it is a book that kind of encompasses everything. I haven't yet really looked at reviews online to see what other people are saying, so I'm really curious to see what other people say. But I encourage you to take a look at this book if you're interested in buying a copy. I've linked the publisher's information in the description box below. Okay, bye. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe below. Catch you in the next video.